Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sleep Space. Tonight, we will talk about a fascinating question. Could there be time travelers living among us? You've probably thought about it before. Maybe after watching a science fiction movie. Maybe after reading about some mysterious person in history. Or maybe while lying in bed, wide awake, wondering if your neighbour with the suspiciously outdated clothes is just really bad at fashion, or actually from the year 1850. Tonight, we're going to explore this idea in depth, and as you listen, you can relax and drift into the calm space between curiosity and wonder, knowing that time itself may not be as rigid as it seems. Let's start with the basics. Time travel, in theory, is not pure fantasy. Einstein's theory of relativity tells us that time is not fixed, it's flexible. Depending on how fast you move or how close you are to a massive object, time can stretch or compress. This has actually been tested. Astronauts who spend time orbiting Earth at high speeds technically age a tiny bit less than those of us on the ground. The effect is incredibly small, but it's real. So the concept of traveling through time, even if only by fractions of a second, already exists in science. The bigger leap is imagining people moving dramatically forward or backward in ways noticeable to us. That's where things get fun, mysterious, and maybe even a little unsettling. Now, if time travel is possible, the next logical question is, where are the time travelers? If people from the future have cracked the code, wouldn't they be here already, blending in, taking notes, and probably being very confused by our obsession with avocado toast? This is sometimes called the Fermi paradox of time travel. Just as we wonder why advanced aliens haven't revealed themselves, we might ask why future humans haven't popped in to say hello, or at least to warn us about awkward hairstyles and questionable fashion trends that are definitely going to come back around. One answer could be that they are here, but they're very good at hiding. After all, if you travelled back in time, you wouldn't exactly walk around announcing it. Imagine arriving in the year 2025 and saying, "Don't mind me, I'm from 2340. Just here to see how people still use phones with screens instead of neural implants." People would lock you up or, at best, think you're promoting a weird new Netflix show. Blending in would be essential. You'd need to know how to talk, dress, and act without raising suspicion. And let's be honest, if time travelers do exist, they've probably slipped past unnoticed simply because we're too distracted staring at our own screens to notice the strange person who doesn't quite belong. There have been countless rumours and so-called proofs of time travelers through history. Some are laughably fake, bad photoshops of a man in modern sunglasses standing in the 1940s, or a woman in a black and white Charlie Chaplin film who looks like she's holding a cell phone. But some accounts are harder to dismiss. For example, there's the story of John Titor, a man who appeared on internet forums in the early 2000s claiming to be from the year 2036. He wrote long, detailed posts about his mission, his timeline, and even made predictions. Some of those predictions were vague, some wrong, but others eerily close to events that unfolded later. Was John Titor a clever hoaxer, or someone who actually slipped through time and decided the internet was the best place to hang out while waiting? Humans love mysteries like this, partly because they tickle our sense of possibility. And let's face it, the idea of meeting a time traveller is thrilling. But let's slow down and think about the mechanics for a moment. If time travel exists in the future, the people who use it would face huge challenges. For instance, would interacting with us alter history? We've all seen the movies. One small change in the past can ripple forward. creating a completely different present. Step on the wrong bug, and suddenly your favorite band never forms. Buy the wrong stock, and suddenly there's no Apple, no iPhones, just endless shelves of rotary phones in every colour. If time travelers are here, maybe they're under strict orders not to interfere, to simply observe like scientists, quietly studying how we live. That would make them more like tourists on a safari than participants in our lives. Of course, some argue that even if time travel is possible, it might not work the way we think. One idea is that travelling back in time doesn't alter our timeline, but creates a new, branching one. So a person from the future visiting our present might just create an alternate version of history, leaving their original timeline untouched. If that's true, then time travelers could do whatever they want: change events, give us advanced technology, or warn us about disasters without affecting their own home era. It's a tidy solution to the paradox, but it raises another question. Why don't we see evidence of these alternate timelines? Unless, and here's the creepy thought, maybe we do, and we just don't realize it. Deja vu, strange historical glitches, and odd unsolved mysteries might all be little footprints of travellers from outside our own flow of time. Think about historical anomalies. Every so often, archaeologists dig up something that just doesn't fit. Out-of-place artifacts, objects that seem too advanced for their era, have fueled speculation for centuries. A gear found in ancient rock, a carving that looks suspiciously like someone in a spacesuit. Usually, science has an explanation, but what if just one of these oddities really was the calling card of a time traveler who dropped something they shouldn't have? Maybe the future isn't full of flawless, responsible explorers, but people just like us, forgetful, clumsy, and occasionally bad at keeping secrets. Another angle is to consider how we might actually recognize a time traveler today. What signs would give them away? Someone with knowledge they shouldn't yet have? Someone who seems completely baffled by how to use a smartphone, but not in the way your grandparents are? More like they've never seen one at all. Or maybe someone with a strange accent that doesn't belong to any country, as if the language they learned evolved from ours, but with subtle differences. If you've ever met someone who just seemed not quite in sync, not just quirky, but deeply out of step with the present moment, maybe, just maybe, you brushed shoulders with a visitor from another time. Now let's step into the mind of a hypothetical time traveler. Imagine you're from 500 years in the future, and you've been sent here. What would surprise you most? Probably how primitive we are with energy, still burning fuels instead of harnessing something more elegant. Maybe how strange our politics seem, how fragmented our world is, or perhaps how charmingly simple things are before the overwhelming layers of technology you're used to. Maybe you'd be amused by our memes, maybe horrified by our traffic, maybe both. The point is, time travelers wouldn't just bring knowledge of technology, they'd bring perspective, shaped by centuries we can't even imagine. Of course, we can't talk about this without mentioning the possibility that we ourselves might be the time travelers, in a way. Each of us is already moving through time at a steady pace, second by second. What feels fixed could actually be a slow journey to an unknown destination. And if we've already proven we can manipulate time just a little with speed and gravity, perhaps one day humans will look back at us, wondering how we ever survived without the ability to skip around in history. If that day comes, then someone listening to this right now might be the ancestor of the first true time traveler. Maybe your great-great-great-grandchild will be the one to stand in front of a humming machine and step into another century. Before we get too deep, let's circle back to where we are. Lying here, relaxing, thinking about the strange, wonderful possibility that someone from another time could be walking among us. The truth is, we don't know. It could all be wild imagination, or it could be one of the biggest secrets of the universe. What matters is that by exploring these ideas, we stretch our minds beyond the ordinary. Whether time travelers are real or not, the thought itself reminds us that time is not as rigid as the ticking of a clock, and reality is full of more mysteries than we can count. And as you listen tonight, you can let that sense of wonder carry you. Because if time travel is possible, then every moment is more precious than we think. Each second could connect to endless possibilities, and somewhere, somewhen, someone might already be listening to you, from a future we can barely imagine. For now, though, you're safe here, moving gently forward in the flow of time, resting as the night unfolds. If we're going to seriously explore whether there could be time travelers among us, we need to tackle the big scientific questions first. Because while it's fun to imagine someone in a trench coat stepping out of a swirling portal behind the grocery store, the universe is picky about its rules. And if there's one thing we know about time, it's that it doesn't like being messed with. Einstein's relativity gave us our first real hint that time is not absolute. It bends and stretches depending on speed and gravity. If you hop on a spaceship and travel close to the speed of light, time for you will tick slower than it does for the people you left behind on Earth. In other words, you'd come back having aged less. That's not science fiction, it's tested. We've flown extremely precise atomic clocks on airplanes, and when they landed, they were a fraction of a second behind the clocks on the ground. Not much, but enough to prove the point. Time is flexible. So if time can bend, could it break? Could someone punch right through it, landing in another century like a kid hopping across stepping stones in a creek? Some physicists think yes, under the right conditions. One possibility is a wormhole, a tunnel through space-time. If you could connect 2 points in space and time, then stepping through might take you not just to another location, but to another era. Picture it as a cosmic subway system, with stops not just across the galaxy, but across centuries. The catch? We have no idea how to make one, and even if we did, keeping it stable would require energy on a scale we can barely imagine, but in theory, it's there, like a door waiting to be unlocked. Now let's talk paradoxes, because this is where time travel stories get tangled. Suppose someone from the future really is here, living among us. They'd have to navigate carefully because the grandfather paradox looms. This classic puzzle says that if you went back in time and prevented your grandparents from meeting, you'd erase your own existence, which means you couldn't have traveled back in the first place. Oops, it's a logical nightmare. And it suggests that maybe the universe has built-in safeguards. Some theorists believe events simply wouldn't allow contradictions. You might try to change history, but something would always prevent it. Your gun jams, the bus runs late, you sneeze at the wrong moment. It sounds almost comical, but it's a serious line of thought called the Novikov self-consistency principle. On the other hand, there's the multiverse idea. Every time a traveler makes a change, reality splits, creating a new timeline. In this version, you could do whatever you want. Stop a war, invent rock and roll before Elvis, or buy stock in a company before it exists. And your original timeline would remain unaffected. You'd simply be in a new branch of reality, living with the consequences there. If that's how it works, then time travelers could be moving freely, and we'd never know, because their changes wouldn't ripple back to us. It's neat, it's tidy, and it could mean there are endless versions of our world out there, each with small or enormous differences. Somewhere, there may be a version of you listening to this, but living in a society that banned pizza toppings, or one where dinosaurs were never wiped out, and you have to check under your car for velociraptors before driving. Okay, so suppose the mechanics are real, and someone figured them out. What would that look like in our daily lives? How would a time traveller slip into our world unnoticed? Let's face it, humans are adaptable, but also nosy. We notice when someone's haircut looks strange, never mind if they're centuries out of fashion. A traveller would have to prepare carefully. They'd study our history, learn our slang, dress the part, and probably avoid drawing attention. But even with preparation, mistakes happen. Imagine someone saying, "Can I borrow your holographic notepad?" and everyone staring blankly at them. Or they ask where the nearest water pump is, because they've read about 2025, but confused it with 1825. These little slips might be exactly the kind of odd encounters people sometimes report. Strangers who seem off, confused, or oddly knowledgeable about things they shouldn't know yet. There's another angle here. Time travelers might not even need machines or portals. Some suggest consciousness itself could be the key. If the mind can exist outside linear time, something even quantum physics hints at, then perhaps future humans have learned how to shift awareness into different points in history. In that case, the traveller among us might not be physically here, but mentally present, observing through borrowed eyes, like an intertemporal tourist. It sounds outlandish, but if reality is stranger than we think, maybe our thoughts are already slipping across time more than we realise. Déjà vu, precognitive dreams, and sudden flashes of knowledge could all be side effects of this kind of time tourism. Let's not forget the human factor. If you had the ability to travel through time, would you really be content just observing? Or would curiosity get the better of you? Maybe you'd want to see if the pyramids were really built with alien help, or if Shakespeare actually wrote all those plays. Maybe you'd want to watch your favourite historical figure give a speech in person. And maybe, just maybe, you'd want to nudge things a little, save someone, whisper advice, plant an idea. If time travellers are here, then maybe some of history's great leaps weren't purely random. Maybe someone gave a quiet push at just the right moment. Of course, there's the opposite concern. If travellers are here, are they watching us for research, or for something less friendly? Think about it. If you had access to all of history, you'd know which moments are the most fragile, which events tip the balance. Maybe travellers are here studying us not out of curiosity, but out of necessity. Our era might be more important than we realise, a hinge point where the future could go very wrong or very right. That would make our time a popular destination, like a historical theme park, and we might be the unsuspecting actors on the stage, never realising the audience is made up of people from centuries ahead. History already has mysteries that make people wonder if travellers left fingerprints. Like the man known as Rudolph Fentz, who supposedly appeared in Times Square in the 1950s, dressed in 19th century clothes, carrying items from decades earlier, and was hit by a car before anyone could ask him what happened. Or Andrew Carlson, who was arrested for insider trading after turning $800 into $350 million in the stock market, claiming he was from the future and just knew which stocks would rise. These stories are often debunked, exaggerated, or outright made up, but they endure because they speak to a deep possibility in us, that maybe, once in a while, someone really does slip through time. Now let's sprinkle in some humour, because we can't take ourselves too seriously while talking about this. If travellers are blending into modern life, you have to wonder how they cope with our quirks. Imagine someone from the year 4000 trying their first pumpkin spice latte, taking one sip and saying, "This is what destroyed civilization." Or picture them sitting through one of our political debates, taking furious notes and muttering, "So this is how it all unraveled." Honestly, if future people are here, they probably think we're adorable and frustrating in equal measure, like toddlers playing with firecrackers. There's also the idea that travelers may not be humans at all, not in the way we think. Maybe in the future, humanity has evolved or merged with technology, becoming something new. If they came back, would we even recognize them as us? Perhaps they look just like us, or perhaps they've hidden themselves behind perfect disguises. Or maybe the strange lights in the sky we call UFOs aren't aliens at all, but humans from centuries ahead, visiting us in sleek crafts designed to handle the stresses of time as well as space. Some scientists and historians have even suggested this, that UFO sightings might be future humans, zipping around to study their ancestors. It's not as far-fetched as it sounds once you accept the possibility of time travel. Let's pull back and think big. If time travelers exist, it might change the way we see everything. It would mean the future isn't sealed off. It's part of a larger whole. It would mean that history is not just something behind us, but a place we could actually meet. And it would force us to confront our own responsibility. If someone from the future is watching us right now, what do we want them to see? A species stumbling around, distracted and divided? Or a species trying, however imperfectly, to build something worth preserving? The thought itself can be motivating, because if we are a hinge point in history, maybe our choices matter more than we realize. In the end, the question of whether travelers are here may never be fully answered. But the signs, the stories, the science, and the sheer allure of the idea keep it alive. The universe has already surprised us countless times. Why not with this? As we continue through this journey, remember, the truth might be stranger than fiction, and the line between myth and possibility is thinner than we think. One of the most interesting things about the idea of time travelers is that people have been whispering about them for centuries, even before the word time travel existed. Long before Einstein scribbled equations, human imagination was already busy dreaming about bending the rules of time. Every culture has myths, stories, or legends that feel suspiciously like glimpses of time slipping sideways. And if we listen carefully, these old stories may be humanity's first brush with the idea that visitors from another age could be walking beside us. Take, for example, the ancient Hindu texts, some of which describe gods and sages who travel to other realms where time flows differently. In one story, a man spends a short time in a heavenly place, only to return and find that hundreds of years have passed on Earth. Sound familiar? That's essentially time dilation, described long before modern physics. In Japan, there's the legend of Urashima Taro, a fisherman who saves a turtle and is rewarded by being taken to an undersea palace. He stays what feels like a few days, but when he returns to the surface, centuries have passed. His home is gone, and everyone he knew is dead. These aren't just bedtime stories. They echo the same themes we wrestle with in modern science. Time moves differently in different places, and travelling through it can leave you out of sync. History is also sprinkled with odd accounts that make you wonder. There are reports of people who appear suddenly in places they don't belong, sometimes dressed oddly, sometimes speaking strange dialects. In the 1800s, a man supposedly appeared in Germany claiming to be from a country called Laxaria, a nation no one had ever heard of. He spoke a language nobody could identify. He was eventually dismissed as insane, but some have suggested he wasn't from another place at all, but another time. Then there are ghostly accounts of people walking into buildings that suddenly seem to transform into older versions of themselves, only to flicker back to the present. These stories are often chalked up to imagination or tricks of the mind, but they fit eerily well with the possibility of brief overlaps in time. Of course, some of the most popular time traveler tales come from photographs. You've probably seen the famous hipster picture taken in the 1940s showing a crowd of people dressed in period clothing, and right there in the middle is a man wearing sunglasses, a printed t-shirt, and what looks like a modern camera. Critics say it's just someone who was ahead of fashion trends, but believers swear he doesn't belong. Then there's the black and white photo of a woman at a 1928 Charlie Chaplin premiere who seems to be talking on a cell phone. Skeptics argue she was holding a hearing aid, but it hasn't stopped the photo from fueling endless debates. The truth is, we want to believe. These anomalies are like little cracks in the wall of time, and we peer through, hoping to catch a glimpse of something extraordinary. Let's not forget John Titor, the internet's most famous alleged time traveler. He appeared in online forums in 2000, claiming he was a soldier from 2036 sent back to retrieve a computer from 1975. His posts were oddly detailed, filled with technical jargon, predictions, and even sketches of his supposed time machine. He warned of civil unrest, nuclear war, and a fractured future. Some of his predictions never happened, at least not in our timeline, but others were uncomfortably close. People still argue over whether he was a hoaxer, a storyteller, or something stranger. The fact that his story lingers decades later says something about how deeply this idea resonates. So why do we find these stories so compelling? Partly because they blur the line between the ordinary and the extraordinary. We all know what it feels like to lose track of time. An afternoon vanishes, or a memory feels like yesterday when it was 10 years ago. Time itself is slippery in our experience. Add to that the human craving for mystery, and suddenly every odd story, every unexplained detail, looks like evidence of something bigger. We don't just like the idea of time travelers, we need them. They remind us that the world might still hold secrets beyond what we can measure with clocks and calendars. Now let's think about how hard it would be for someone from the future to blend into the past, or into our present. History is messy. Our slang changes every year. Our fashion swings wildly from skinny jeans to oversized parachute pants. Technology evolves so quickly that if you skipped just 10 years, you'd have catching up to do. Someone from 100 years ahead would have to study carefully just to order coffee without sounding suspicious. Yes, barista unit, 1 energy liquid with foamed protein, please. They'd be outed immediately, and yet maybe some people are just that good at hiding. We all know someone who seems just a little out of sync, like they missed the memo on how to act normal. Are they just quirky, or are they time tourists doing their best? Another fascinating angle is that if time travelers are here, they might be deliberately disguising themselves in plain sight. Think about it. If you wanted to observe without suspicion, you'd go to places where unusual behavior is expected. Touristy spots, music festivals, cosplay conventions, Comic-Con. Imagine a traveller from the year 2800 walking around in a superhero costume. No one would blink twice. They could slip in, record their data, and disappear, leaving everyone else thinking they were just a really committed fan of obscure anime. The perfect cover. And then there are the stories of people who seem to know too much too soon. Writers, inventors, or thinkers who were wildly ahead of their time. Leonardo da Vinci sketched designs for helicopters centuries before anyone built them. Jules Verne described submarines and moon landings long before they were real. H.G. Wells wrote about atomic bombs in 1914. Were these just the brilliant imaginations of geniuses, or whispers of knowledge they shouldn't yet have? Sometimes inspiration feels suspiciously like information. Maybe time travelers don't announce themselves, but they plant ideas, nudging us forward when we're ready. Let's be playful for a moment. Suppose you are a time traveler from the year 2500. You've arrived in 2025 and are trying not to stand out. What's your biggest challenge? Is it getting used to our food, which is still full of things like gluten, sugar, and artificial colouring? Is it pretending you don't know how events will turn out, biting your tongue during every news broadcast? Or is it just trying to keep a straight face while someone insists their flip phone is cutting edge? Honestly, your biggest danger would probably be slipping up and accidentally telling someone what happens in the next Marvel movie. But there's also a sobering thought. If travelers are here, maybe they're not tourists. Maybe they're researchers watching us for reasons that aren't fun at all. What if our present is a turning point they need to study? The way we look at fossils of creatures that lived right before a mass extinction. That idea is unsettling, but it also adds weight to our actions. If we're being observed by the future, then history isn't just something we inherit, it's something we're performing right now. Of course, the skeptic in us pushes back. Many of these stories fall apart under scrutiny. The hipster photo? The clothes actually existed in the 1940s. The Chaplin cell phone, hearing aid, John Titor? Most likely a clever hoax. Humans are great at seeing patterns where none exist. We crave wonder, so we invent it. That doesn't mean time travelers don't exist. It just means proof is slippery. And maybe it always will be. After all, if they're really here, they'd be careful. They wouldn't want to break the rules of their own mission. They'd stay hidden, leaving only breadcrumbs of curiosity for us to follow. Still, isn't it delicious to imagine a traveller walking through a city street, watching us with quiet amusement, thinking how primitive and fascinating we are, a hidden observer in a crowd, noting our laughter, our mistakes, our endless energy, someone who already knows where we're heading but can't say a word. It's both humbling and exhilarating, because if that's true, then our lives aren't just small blips in history. They're part of a story big enough that even the future cares to come back and watch. And maybe that's why we love these stories so much, because they make us feel bigger, connected to something beyond our narrow slice of time. They remind us that history isn't just behind us, it could be beside us or ahead of us, folding back in ways we can't yet imagine. Let's imagine just for a moment that tomorrow someone stood on live television and announced, "Yes, I am a time traveller." What would happen? Well, first, the internet would break. Every social media feed would be filled with memes, debates, and at least 10 conspiracy theories about whether it was all staged by the government, by Hollywood, or by Elon Musk on a particularly ambitious Tuesday. But then, once the chaos settled, society would face a bigger question. What does it mean for us if time travel is not just fiction, but fact? The human mind loves certainty. We like neat beginnings, middles, and ends. If proof of time travelers appeared, it would scramble our sense of history. Suddenly, every event we've ever studied could be questioned. Did it really happen that way? Or did someone from the future nudge it? Was history written by those who lived it, or by those who visited it later? Imagine the debates in classrooms, the endless arguments between historians and physicists, and the sheer confusion in dinner conversations across the world. And then comes the practical paranoia. If travellers exist, are they influencing us right now? Is that awkward co-worker who always seems to know when the vending machine will run out of your favourite snack actually from 2400? Is your neighbour who gives strangely specific advice on technology investments really a stockbroker? Or are they a visitor making sure their retirement fund in the future is extra cushy? We would start side-eyeing everyone. Trust issues would skyrocket. And the more we tried to prove it, the more slippery the truth would become. Because remember, if travellers are real, they're probably very good at blending in. The paradoxes keep multiplying the more you think about it. Let's revisit the classic grandfather paradox. It's not just about stopping your grandparents from meeting, it's about the ripple effect of any change. If a traveller here today accidentally bumps into someone and changes the timing of their life by just a minute, that small difference could snowball into something huge. Maybe the person misses a bus, avoids an accident, meets someone new, and suddenly an entire family line exists that wasn't supposed to. Or conversely, one doesn't exist that should have. The butterfly effect, but on steroids. It makes you wonder, maybe history already has fingerprints of travellers baked into it. Subtle changes we don't even notice because, to us, they've always been there. Here's another paradox. If time travellers are here, why don't they announce themselves? Why all the secrecy? One answer could be a version of the prime directive from Star Trek. Don't interfere with less advanced civilizations. Maybe we're the less advanced ones. If the future has strict rules, then travellers would face serious consequences for revealing themselves. Another possibility is that they have revealed themselves, but nobody believes them. Imagine trying to convince someone you're from the year 3200 while wearing jeans and sneakers. Unless you've got a time machine parked outside, you'd sound like you belong in a sci-fi convention panel, not in a history book. This brings us to the psychology of belief. Humans are natural storytellers, and time travel stories scratch an itch deep in our brains. They let us imagine escaping our limitations. We've all thought about going back to fix a mistake, or leaping forward to see how our lives turn out. So when someone claims to be a traveller, we're half skeptical and half hopeful. Even if part of us says it's nonsense, another part whispers, but what if? That whisper is why stories like John Titor stick around, why blurry photos of future gadgets go viral, and why people in 2025 are still fascinated by the possibility of someone among us knowing tomorrow's headlines. If proof did come out, the economic fallout alone would be wild. Stock markets would go haywire because anyone with future knowledge could manipulate them. Sports betting would collapse overnight. Why bet if someone might already know the outcome of the Super Bowl? Even our entertainment industry might crumble. Who would bother waiting years for movies to release if someone could spoil them centuries in advance? Don't tell me what happens in Avengers 17, I want to be surprised. Time travel could ruin binge watching forever. But let's get more philosophical. If time travelers exist, it forces us to reconsider what time even is. We think of it as a river flowing forward, but maybe it's more like a vast landscape, with every moment coexisting. A traveller might not be moving through time so much as shifting their position within it. That means our past, present, and future might all be equally real. Right now, while you're listening to this, some version of the future may already be happening, and someone there could be choosing to step back and observe this very moment. It's dizzying, but also kind of comforting. It suggests that our lives, however small they feel, might matter far beyond our immediate present. Here's a lighter thought. If travellers are here, maybe they're disappointed in how boring we are. We imagine they'd want to see major events, the signing of historic documents, the landing on the moon, the invention of pizza bagels. But what if future historians are actually here, watching us fold laundry, eat cereal, and argue about what to watch on TV? Maybe for them, the daily life of early 21st century humans is fascinating. We think we're ordinary, but to someone centuries ahead, we might be as exotic as watching dinosaurs graze. Now let's consider the darker possibility. Maybe travelers are here to prevent disaster. What if our era is a dangerous fork in history, and the only way for their future to survive is to make sure we don't mess everything up? In that case, some of the world's coincidences, the close calls, the sudden discoveries, the unexpected breakthroughs, might not be coincidences at all. They might be interventions, subtle nudges from people who know just how fragile things really are. That's a heavy thought, but also an inspiring one. Because if that's true, it means our choices today ripple across centuries, and someone out there cares enough to try and help us steer. There's another odd puzzle to chew on. If travelers are among us, maybe they're not even aware of it. What if time travel technology doesn't look like a big glowing machine, but more like an accident of physics? Imagine someone in the future experimenting with quantum mechanics, only to suddenly wake up in 2025 with no idea how they got here. They might live quietly, thinking they're just confused, when in fact they've slipped through time. And if that's possible, maybe some of the missing persons throughout history weren't abducted by aliens or lost in the wilderness. They were pulled out of their own time. And here's where things get extra strange. Some physicists argue that time travel to the past might be impossible, but travel to the future is inevitable. Once we build machines capable of near light speed, we'll be able to jump forward in time by simply moving faster than the rest of the planet. That means eventually someone will do it. And if someone eventually does it, then isn't it just a matter of when? That thought alone makes the idea of travelers walking among us not just fun speculation, but something we might have to genuinely grapple with someday. Let's lighten the mood again. Suppose a time traveler had to get through airport security. Imagine the chaos. TSA officer: "Sir, please empty your pockets." Traveler: "Okay, here's my temporal stabilizer, my antimatter battery, and this small black hole in a jar." You can already hear the alarms going off. And don't even get me started on how they'd explain their passport. Place of birth? Doesn't exist yet. Honestly, blending in might be their biggest challenge, but maybe that's the beauty of it. If time travelers are here, they're not waving banners or giving TED Talks. They're quiet, slipping in unnoticed, leaving just enough mystery to make us wonder. And maybe that's the point, because sometimes the wondering itself changes us. It makes us look at time differently, see history not as something finished, but as something alive, still in motion. If time travelers are blending into our world, one of the most fascinating questions is, where would they go? And what would they do once they got here? History is enormous, like an endless buffet. Do you start with the pyramids, wander into the Renaissance, maybe grab dessert at Woodstock in 1969? Or do you skip all the obvious tourist attractions and hang out in quiet corners where no one will notice you scribbling notes for your history report back in the year 4100? Imagine a traveller stepping into different eras. Ancient Egypt would be spectacular to witness, but also tricky. One wrong word and you'd be mistaken for a foreign spy. The Middle Ages might sound appealing until you remember there were no antibiotics, no plumbing, and no Wi-Fi. The 20th century? That's probably the equivalent of a theme park for time tourists. Electric lights, radio, global wars, rock and roll. The early 21st century, our present, might be especially interesting because it's the dawn of the digital age. To someone from centuries ahead, this time might look like the invention of fire, messy, crude, but essential to everything that comes later. But here's the thing, travelers wouldn't just be interested in kings, battles, or famous moments. They'd probably want to study the little things we overlook. How we eat, how we argue, how we laugh. Historians love the everyday details because they tell the real story of a culture. So while we picture travelers at the moon landing or the fall of the Berlin Wall, they might actually be sitting quietly in a diner, watching people sip coffee and scroll through their phones, trying to understand what daily life was like before humanity made whatever leap awaits us next. Now let's think about the practical problem of technology. If a traveler brought gadgets from the future, those could give them away. Imagine someone in 2025 pulling out a paper-thin device that projects holograms. People would notice, so they'd have to be careful. Maybe their tech looks ordinary, like a phone, but does things far beyond what we can imagine. Picture someone snapping photos with what looks like an old camera, but it's actually recording data about the entire electromagnetic spectrum, gravitational fluctuations, and even quantum fields around us. To them, that's basic. To us, it's sorcery. Some speculate that this is already happening, that travelers might disguise their tech as ordinary objects. A simple wristwatch could be a time stabilization device. A notebook could be a quantum recorder. Even something like a pair of glasses might be filled with sensors, able to analyze everything in sight. Think about it. How many times have you seen someone with a weird gadget and just shrugged, assuming it's a new model you haven't heard of? For all we know, half the early adopters of strange-looking tech aren't early adopters at all. They're late arrivals. Then there's the possibility that time travelers aren't even trying to hide. Maybe we're just interpreting them the wrong way. Take UFOs, for instance. The standard idea is that they're aliens, visitors from another planet. But what if they're not from another place, but another time? Sleek crafts, odd movements, appearances that don't fit our physics. These could be signs of vehicles designed not just for space, but for time. If you wanted to observe ancient history without setting foot in it, wouldn't you use something like a ship that could hover silently, watch without interfering, and then disappear? In that light, UFOs might not be extraterrestrial at all. They could be ultra-temporal. Here's a mind-bending twist. What if the aliens people claim to see aren't aliens, but future humans? Big eyes, small bodies, strange proportions. Maybe that's what we evolve into after centuries of living in different conditions. If future humans wanted to travel back, they might look so different that we wouldn't even recognize them as us. And maybe they wear suits or disguises to blend in, but the occasional slip-up explains why strange sightings dot human history. That would mean the answer to "Are we alone?" is no, because we're hanging out with ourselves. But let's bring it back to the here and now. If time travelers are here, how would we actually detect them? We'd probably look for anomalies, people who seem to know too much before it happens, historical events that feel nudged, objects that don't belong in their time. And maybe we already have these clues. There are artifacts like the Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek device that works like a computer. Some argue it was simply the peak of ancient engineering, but others wonder if it's an echo of knowledge that shouldn't have existed yet. Out-of-place artifacts pop up now and then, fueling speculation. Most are explainable, but what if just one isn't? That would be enough to prove the theory true. Of course, if time travelers are blending in, they might be under strict instructions not to interact. Think about how we treat animals in the wild. Scientists try not to interfere too much because observation itself can change behaviour. Travellers might view us the same way: fascinating, fragile, and easily thrown off course. That would explain why we don't have clear proof. It's not that they aren't here, it's that they're bound by rules. Maybe their very survival depends on keeping us unaware. Let's get playful for a second. Imagine a support group for time travellers stuck in 2025. Hi, my name is Zor-El, and I'm from 2085-70. I miss teleportation and post-scarcity brunch. Hi, I'm Clara from 1792, and I'm just trying to figure out TikTok. The challenges of fitting in would be endless. Imagine trying to rent an apartment without a social security number, or trying to order online without a credit card. Our systems assume everyone has roots in the present, which would make life tricky for someone who technically hasn't been born yet. There's another possibility. Time travellers may not interact with us at all, but with history itself. Maybe they're more interested in recording data than making friends. Perhaps they're scanning our oceans, our atmosphere, our buildings, collecting evidence for research. In that case, the little oddities we notice, strange lights, glitches, people who vanish, might just be side effects of their work. We don't understand because we're not meant to. It would be like ants trying to interpret a biologist's notebook. And yet, if you think about it, wouldn't it be kind of comforting to know that travellers are here? That the future exists and it cares enough to look back? It would mean that humanity survives long enough to figure this out, which is a hopeful thought in itself. Because time travel requires incredible sophistication, mastery of physics, energy, and perhaps even consciousness. If someone from the future is standing next to you at the bus stop, that means we made it. We didn't destroy ourselves. We grew, evolved, and built wonders. And maybe they're here to quietly remind us that we're capable of it. But of course, there's always the nagging question: why don't they just say so? Why don't they tell us how to solve our problems, how to avoid mistakes, how to make life easier? Maybe it's the paradox risk-gain. Or maybe they've tried and the people they told ended up ignored, disbelieved, or locked away as eccentrics. That's the cruel irony. Even if a traveller confessed, chances are we wouldn't believe them. And maybe that's why they feel safe. Because the best camouflage in 2025 isn't technology, it's our own skepticism. Imagine history as a giant domino chain. Every little nudge can change the pattern. A traveller stepping into our timeline might decide not to interfere, but simply existing here could have ripple effects. The question is, are we living in the original version of history, or are we already in the edited cut, touched up by hands from tomorrow? Think about breakthroughs that seem to come out of nowhere. Some inventors make sense. They build on years of research, clear steps forward. But others appear like lightning in the dark. Nikola Tesla dreamed up wireless energy, radio waves, and even ideas that sound suspiciously close to futuristic technology. How did his brain leap so far ahead of the crowd? Was it genius, luck, or maybe a whisper from someone who had already seen the future? If you were a time traveller, you wouldn't need to drop blueprints. You'd only need to nudge an idea, spark a conversation, plant the right seed. The person would think they came up with it, but really they were guided. This could explain why human culture sometimes jumps forward in strange leaps. Take the Renaissance. After centuries of what Europeans called the Dark Ages, suddenly art, science, and philosophy explode with life. Da Vinci sketches machines that look like helicopters, submarines, even tanks. How? Did he just dream beyond his time, or did he meet someone who described things centuries away? If you think of him as an artist with an open mind, maybe he was simply attuned to future possibilities. But if you think like a conspiracy theorist, maybe he was a friend of someone who didn't technically belong in the 15th century. Now let's get to science. If future humans are travelling back, they'd carry knowledge of physics, medicine, and biology far beyond our own. The ethical dilemma would be enormous. Do they share it? Imagine giving 21st century humanity access to limitless clean energy, or cures for diseases, or faster than light travel. On the surface, it sounds wonderful, but history shows we're not always responsible with new tools. We discover fire and we build warmth, but also weapons. We discover nuclear energy and we power cities, but also create bombs. Maybe travelers are under strict orders. Observe, but don't hand us the keys to the kingdom. Because while we think we'd use them wisely, the future knows better. Here's where it gets even stranger. What if culture itself is influenced not by direct teaching, but by subtle nudges? Think about the way certain ideas seem to pop up in many places at once. Multiple inventors racing to create the telephone. Different mathematicians coming up with the same concepts simultaneously. Some call it the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age. But what if it's not just spirit? What if time travelers are encouraging key developments, making sure humanity doesn't stall out or wander too far off course? It would be like gardeners trimming a hedge, snipping here, shaping there, guiding growth without completely controlling it. But then there's the question of art. Could our greatest works be inspired by glimpses of things that don't exist yet? When science fiction writers in the 20th century imagined spaceships, AI, and even the internet, many of their fantasies eventually came true. Were they just visionaries, or were they tuning into hints from people who knew what was coming? If travelers inspired the great dreamers, then art and literature aren't just entertainment. They're encoded messages from the future, disguised as imagination. Let's play with another idea. Maybe the travelers aren't here to change our science or art at all, but to study how culture forms naturally. To them, we might be like a living museum. Imagine a historian from the year 3500 wandering into a 2020s coffee shop, watching people type on laptops while sipping lattes. For us, it's ordinary. For them, it's priceless data. Ah yes, this is how the ancient humans mix caffeine with screen-based rituals. Fascinating. We might be part of someone's dissertation right now, without realizing it. But the biggest cultural effect could be invisible. What if travelers bring back ideas, slang, or even subtle fashion cues that slip into our time before they should? Trends sometimes appear suddenly, without clear origins. One day, nobody is wearing a certain style. The next, it's everywhere. We chalk it up to influencers, marketing, or chance. But maybe it's someone accidentally seeding the future into the present. Think of it as temporal leakage. Bits of tomorrow dripping into today, disguised as fads. Science might be even more profoundly shaped. If travelers are careful, they wouldn't reveal too much at once. But what if they left behind puzzles, breadcrumbs for us to follow? Theories that seem impossible at first, but prove useful decades later. Some discoveries feel like they were ahead of their time, almost waiting for the world to catch up. What if they literally were? A traveller could drop a hint, then step back, knowing we'd eventually decode it when ready. There's another layer here, perception of reality itself. If someone from the future interacts with us, even slightly, they might shift how we think about existence. Our culture could be guided not toward technology, but toward awareness. Maybe travelers are less interested in teaching us how to build machines, and more interested in nudging us toward realizing how time and consciousness are connected. That could explain why so many cultures develop myths of gods, angels, or mysterious beings. Perhaps some of those weren't divine at all, but visitors from our own lineage, future humans who seemed godlike only because of their knowledge. Now imagine what happens when someone sees too much. If a traveler accidentally reveals themselves, how would our culture process it? Probably with myth, legend, or conspiracy. Someone meets a strange person with futuristic knowledge, and later it becomes a story of a prophet, a mysterious stranger, or even a science fiction trope. Our imagination might be filled with echoes of real encounters we didn't fully understand. The line between myth and history could be thinner than we think. Let's zoom out and get playful again. Picture a group of time travelers meeting to discuss their field work. One might say, "I accidentally invented jazz." Another chimes in, "Well, I may have planted the idea for the internet." A third says, "I tried to inspire healthy eating, but somehow fast food exploded instead. My bad." The point is, culture is unpredictable. Even with good intentions, travelers might cause effects they didn't plan. One word to the wrong person, one suggestion at the wrong time, and suddenly you've changed everything from politics to pop music. And yet, maybe that's the beauty of it. Maybe the travelers know that culture thrives on chaos. They don't need to micromanage because every spark they add turns into something bigger than they could have predicted. We think of time travelers as controllers of destiny, but perhaps they're more like improvisers, riffing along with history's rhythm. They don't direct the orchestra, they jam with it. Of course, the risk of cultural contamination is huge. If we suddenly saw futuristic art or heard future slang, it could destabilize us. Imagine someone in 1820 hearing modern music with electric guitars and digital beats. Their minds might be blown in ways they couldn't handle. That's probably why travelers stay subtle. They don't dump Spotify on the 19th century. They slip in a folk song that hints at rhythms yet to come. They don't drop an iPhone in the 1800s. They plant the seed of communication breakthroughs. Always gentle, always indirect, always plausible. But here's a more mind-bending idea. What if some of our strangest cultural shifts are actually corrections? Maybe history didn't originally unfold this way. Maybe travelers adjusted things, nudged events, and what we're living now is already the altered path. That could explain déjà vu, that eerie sense that something feels off or different. Maybe we're picking up on timelines that once existed, but were smoothed over. If so, then our very culture isn't ours in the pure sense. It's a collaboration between us and our future descendants. And there's the paradox again. If they influenced us, then we influenced them. The music they grew up with, the science they studied, the art that inspired them, it might all be based on changes they themselves planted in our era. It's a feedback loop. Culture becomes a Mobius strip, with no clear start or end, just a flowing exchange between now and then. Imagine walking through a crowded street. People rush past, each absorbed in their own lives, checking phones, sipping coffee, carrying shopping bags. Somewhere in that blur, what if one person doesn't belong? Not in the sense of being out of fashion or acting odd, but in a deeper way. They're here, but they're not of here. They know things they shouldn't, see patterns we can't, and carry themselves with the quiet weight of centuries. The unnerving thought is, would we even notice? Or would our minds, trained to accept the ordinary, simply file them under eccentric stranger and move on. That's the psychological trick of living among time travelers. They wouldn't arrive with neon signs flashing, "I'm from the future." They'd blend in, and our brains would do the rest. Humans are experts at ignoring anomalies. If someone says something weird, we laugh it off. If someone dresses strangely, we call it a trend. If someone seems to predict the future, we label it coincidence. Our skepticism is the best cloak a traveller could wear. They don't have to hide from us. We hide them from ourselves. But suppose you started paying attention. What signs might give them away? One clue might be their relationship with knowledge. A traveller might slip up and mention something that hasn't happened yet, or display insight beyond their supposed experience. Imagine someone in 2019 casually predicting a global pandemic, economic collapse, and the sudden worldwide obsession with sourdough bread. You'd think they were joking, paranoid, or unnervingly well-read. And yet, to them, it would simply be memory. That uncanny awareness of what's coming could be a tell. Another clue, body language. People are products of their time. The way we gesture, the slang we use, the rhythm of our speech, all of it is tied to culture. A traveller from 200 years ahead might struggle to fully mimic the small quirks of our era. They might pause too long before responding, or use expressions slightly off. It wouldn't be obvious, more like a faint accent you can't place. You'd think, this person feels a little different. Maybe not enough to call them out, but enough to leave an impression. Then there's behaviour. Some theorists suggest that travellers might seem unusually observant, always watching, always analysing. Not because they're antisocial, but because they're collecting data. Imagine being dropped into the past. You'd want to soak up every detail, every smell, every gesture. That quiet intensity could stand out. Maybe the person on the park bench staring at pigeons isn't lost in thought. They're recording a mental snapshot for the archives of the 31st century. Here's where it gets more personal. How would it feel to actually meet one? Most of us expect awe, like encountering a wizard or alien, but the reality might be more subtle. You'd meet someone who feels strangely wise, oddly familiar, or slightly out of sync. They might say things that stick in your mind long after, like cryptic advice or peculiar phrases. Be careful with doors, they might say, and you'd laugh. Until months later, a decision about doors really does change your life. In the moment, they'd seem quirky. In hindsight, they'd seem prophetic. Some people already claim these encounters happen. Strange mentors, mysterious strangers, or fleeting meetings with people who vanish afterward. These stories litter folklore and modern life. Psychologists might call them projections, coincidences, or misremembered events. But what if they're exactly what they seem? Encounters with those who aren't supposed to be here. The most convincing travellers might not look futuristic at all. They might look like your neighbour, your co-worker, or even a random person you pass once and never see again. And let's not forget déjà vu. That eerie sense you've lived a moment before could be your mind glitching, or it could be something stranger. Maybe time travelers subtly adjust timelines, creating tiny overlaps. You remember fragments of paths that no longer exist, echoes of choices rewritten. Déjà vu might not be a brain quirk at all, but your subconscious catching a glimpse of edits in history's script. But let's push it further. What if time travelers don't just live among us as strangers? What if they're woven into our lives in deeper ways? What if your eccentric uncle, who always seems ahead of the curve, isn't just good at trends? What if your friend who blurts out uncanny predictions isn't just lucky? What if people you've known forever don't actually belong to this timeline, but slipped in from another? That thought rattles the foundation of identity. Because if they're here, they'd need to form relationships, hold jobs, live like us. How many of our closest connections might secretly be tourists from tomorrow? Now consider the psychology of the travellers themselves. Imagine being one of them. You walk among people who are technically your ancestors. You know the arc of history, the disasters, the victories, the heartbreaks. You can't say too much because every word risks changing the flow. You carry secrets so heavy they could crush conversations. How isolating would that feel? To laugh along at memes you know will vanish in a decade, to nod during debates you already know the outcome of, to mourn tragedies you've already studied in textbooks. Every social interaction would be a balancing act. Too distant and you're exposed. Too engaged and you risk paradox. It might explain why some people seem lonely even in crowds. Maybe they're not just shy or introverted. Maybe they're visitors holding back entire lifetimes of context. They can never fully belong because their true home is centuries away. To survive, they'd perfect the art of blending in, of nodding without agreeing, of caring without revealing too much. It would be a quiet, exhausting existence. And then there's the humour of it. Imagine a traveller trying to explain to their supervisors back home how hard it is to blend in. "Sir, I almost got caught again. I said download in 1950, or I accidentally invented avocado toast." Living among us might not just be stressful, it might be hilarious in ways only the traveller truly understands. They'd have to laugh, or else the weight of dissonance would be unbearable. From our side, though, it raises a tantalizing question. If they're here, do they ever slip up? Do they ever confess even just once to a trusted friend? If so, those confessions might be buried in diaries, ignored as ramblings, or dismissed as fantasy. Someone in history might have written the truth, and we labelled it fiction. The book you laughed at might actually be someone's attempt to tell their story before it was safe to admit. Which leads to the strangest thought of all. Maybe some of our greatest storytellers weren't making things up. Maybe they were telling us what they knew, disguised as imagination. Science fiction could be less invention and more translation. Messages from those who've seen what's ahead. That would mean that recognizing a time traveler isn't about spotting futuristic gadgets. It's about paying attention to who's telling the stories that seem too vivid, too plausible, too real. And here's a chilling twist. What if you're one? Sounds absurd, right? But imagine if part of being a traveler meant having your memory wiped, so you could live naturally in the time you're assigned. Maybe that déjà vu, that odd attraction to a certain era, that uncanny skill you can't explain, maybe those are faint echoes of who you really are. Maybe you've been placed here to observe, to live, to blend. The fact that you don't remember doesn't mean it isn't true. In fact, that would be the perfect disguise. For all the wonder and fascination time travelers spark in our imagination, there's a shadow to the story too. Because if they're really here, mingling in our streets, sipping our coffee, quietly steering our culture, then they're walking paradoxes. And paradoxes are dangerous, not just in the oops, I ruined history way, but in ways that could unravel reality itself. Let's get into the messier side of what it would mean to share the planet with people out of sync with time. The first and most famous danger is the butterfly effect. One small change can ripple forward in ways no one can predict. We've all heard the classic version, step on a butterfly in the past, and suddenly the future is unrecognizable. The same logic applies in reverse. If someone from centuries ahead bumps into you, even slightly, they could alter your choices. Maybe you're late to a meeting because a mysterious stranger stopped you on the street. Maybe that meeting was the one where you would have met your future spouse. Now your entire family line is gone, history rewritten by accident. Multiply that by thousands of little interactions, and you start to see the risk. But travelers wouldn't just risk changing personal lives, they'd risk changing civilization. Imagine a traveler sharing one piece of knowledge too early, like nuclear power in the 1600s. It might not spark a golden age, it might spark destruction. Or imagine the opposite. They prevent a disaster we were meant to learn from, which stunts our growth. Every nudge could destabilize the fragile balance of progress. History is a chain reaction, and travelers are essentially walking around with matches. That leads us straight into the grandfather paradox, the classic headache of time travel theory. If someone goes back in time and prevents their own grandparents from meeting, they erase their own existence. But if they don't exist, how could they have travelled back? This paradox isn't just a thought experiment, it's a danger for anyone living in a time where they technically shouldn't be. Maybe travellers are under strict rules to avoid their own ancestors. Maybe there are laws in the future. Do not attend family reunions in the past. Break that law, and you risk deleting yourself, and maybe everyone else in the process. But paradoxes aren't always so personal. There's also the information paradox, sometimes called a bootstrap paradox. Imagine a traveller gives Shakespeare a copy of his own plays. Shakespeare publishes them, becomes famous, and centuries later, the traveller finds those plays in the history books. But who actually wrote them? Nobody. The knowledge exists in a loop, without an origin. If travellers are among us, we might already be living with bootstrap paradoxes. Our inventions, ideas, even entire cultural movements could be things we borrowed from the future. The danger is that if you fill history with too many loops, you start to lose the thread of causality altogether. It's like copying a copy 1,000 times. The original image fades until all you have is static. There's also the ethical danger. If travellers have knowledge of the future, then they have power. Imagine knowing which companies will rise and fall, which political leaders will win, which technologies will dominate. You could become the wealthiest person alive without even trying. You could manipulate markets, topple governments, or steer culture, all while pretending you're just lucky. The ethical temptation is enormous, and while some travellers might be noble, it only takes one reckless individual to cause chaos. If they're really here, are we sure they're all following the rules? Or are some quietly rewriting history for their own gain? And that opens a darker possibility. What if time travel isn't just for historians or tourists? What if governments in the future use it for espionage? Imagine agents moving through history, stealing secrets, planting misinformation, or even assassinating key figures. Wars wouldn't just be fought across space, they'd be fought across time. Our current conflicts might already be influenced by invisible battles happening between factions from the future. If that sounds paranoid, well, maybe paranoia is the natural response when you realise the battlefield isn't just here, it's everywhere. Of course, there's another risk: discovery. If someone today caught undeniable proof of a time traveller, the fallout would be immense. Society might panic, religions might fracture, governments might scramble to weaponize time itself. The traveller would instantly become the most hunted person on Earth, not because of who they are, but because of what they represent. Knowledge of the future is the ultimate commodity, and humans don't have a great track record of handling ultimate commodities gracefully. The very presence of a traveller could destabilize our world, even without them saying a word. Now let's get more abstract. there's the danger of reality collapse. Some physicists suggest that timelines branch whenever paradoxes happen. So if a traveller interferes, instead of breaking time, they just spin off a new universe where their changes play out. Sounds neat, right? Except what if those branches aren't stable? What if they compete with each other or bleed into each other, causing anomalies in our world? Glitches in the Matrix, déjà vu, Mandela effects. These could be signs of overlapping timelines bumping into one another. If that's true, then time travelers might already be destabilizing reality, and we're the ants scrambling to make sense of the cracks. And what about the mental toll? Living among us would be dangerous not just for us, but for the travelers too. Imagine the constant fear of slipping up, using a phrase that doesn't exist yet, humming a song not written for another 200 years, mentioning an event nobody's heard of. One mistake, and you've broken the illusion. The stress could drive someone mad, or worse, they could start to forget which time they belong to. Blend in too well, and maybe you stop being a traveller altogether. You just become one of us, trapped in a past that was never supposed to be your home. If there are people walking among us who come from centuries ahead, or maybe even centuries behind, then the question stops being just scientific or historical. It becomes deeply philosophical. Because their very existence challenges everything we believe about time, fate, free will, and what it means to be human. So let's step away from the gadgets and paradoxes for a moment and dive into what this really says about us. The first and most obvious philosophical problem is free will. If travellers know the future, then how much choice do we really have? If someone from the year 3000 tells you that next week you're going to trip over a shoelace, you'll probably laugh and tie your shoes extra tight. But then, maybe you slip on a loose tile and fall anyway. Suddenly you're wondering, did you choose that moment, or was it already scripted? If travellers can accurately predict events, does that mean the future is fixed? Or are they just nudging us toward one possibility among many? This is the age-old debate between determinism and free will, just dressed up in futuristic clothes. Some philosophers argue that if time travel exists, then the universe must be deterministic. Every moment locked in place, unchangeable, like a movie we're all acting in without realizing it. Travellers wouldn't be changing history, they'd just be fulfilling it, making sure the script plays out as written. Others argue that travellers might prove the opposite, that time is flexible, and the choices we make create ripples that even they can't fully predict. Maybe they only know broad strokes, wars, inventions, cultural shifts, but not the intimate details of who we love, what we laugh at, or how we live. Maybe free will exists in the cracks of history, in the little choices that no traveller can map. This leads to another thorny question: destiny. If travellers exist, then history has already been influenced by the future, which means our world isn't just the product of past decisions, it's the product of future interventions too. Think about that. The books we read, the songs we love, the revolutions that shape nations, they might not have been born purely in their own time. They might be echoes of times that haven't happened yet. Does that make our history less authentic? Or does it mean history is a collaboration across centuries, a kind of co-authored story written by both ancestors and descendants? That thought alone is unsettling. We like to imagine ourselves as the centre of history, making choices that shape the future. But if travellers are here, then the future is shaping us just as much. It's not a one-way street, it's a loop, a dialogue, maybe even a dance. And the dancers aren't just alive today, they're scattered across centuries. Of course, that makes us ask, what does it mean to be human in such a timeline? If our lives are touched by influences from the future, then humanity isn't just a linear story, it's a tapestry woven in multiple directions. Maybe that's why certain ideas seem to appear before their time. Maybe that's why some people are called ahead of their era. Are they geniuses, or just recipients of whispers from tomorrow? Let's not forget the problem of morality. If you were a time traveler, would you have a responsibility to act? Suppose you knew a disaster was coming. Do you step in and prevent it, knowing that the lessons of suffering might also vanish? Or do you let tragedy unfold, respecting the flow of history, even though you could stop it? This is the philosophical dilemma of the traveler. Intervene and risk chaos, or stay silent and bear the guilt of inaction. If they're here, quietly blending in, then maybe they've already decided that silence is the lesser evil. Or maybe some have decided otherwise, and we just don't recognize their interventions for what they are. Another deep question is identity. Imagine being a traveler living in a time that isn't your own. Every culture, every belief, every custom would feel alien to you. Do you cling to your original identity, or do you adapt and become someone new? And if you adapt fully, are you still a traveler, or are you just another citizen of the present? Maybe the real danger isn't paradoxes. It's losing yourself in a time where you don't belong. The philosophy of self-identity becomes tangled when you realize your home isn't just far away. It might not even exist anymore. Now let's play with an even stranger idea. What if time travelers aren't separate from us at all? What if we are them? Consider this. What if reincarnation, déjà vu, and sudden bursts of inspiration aren't mystical phenomena, but echoes of lives lived in different times? Maybe consciousness itself travels, not just bodies. You could be both a 21st century thinker and a 25th century dreamer. Your awareness crossing timelines without you realizing it. If that's the case, then every human might secretly be a time traveler, just one without a machine. That would change philosophy completely. Time wouldn't just be something we pass through, it would be something we participate in. This idea touches another philosophical nerve, memory. If travelers exist, then maybe some of our strangest, unexplainable memories are glimpses of other times we've brushed against. The so-called Mandela effect, where large groups remember different versions of history, might not be misremembering at all. It might be fragments of alternate timelines surfacing in our minds. If so, then memory isn't just a record of the past. It's a messy scrapbook of multiple realities colliding. That makes memory itself philosophical. Can we ever be certain of a single truth if time is flexible? Let's circle back to free will, because this question keeps haunting us. Imagine you meet someone who knows your future. They tell you with eerie precision what job you'll have, who you'll marry when you'll die. Do you accept it as fate, or do you fight against it? Philosophers call this self-fulfilling prophecy. Sometimes trying to avoid a prediction is what makes it come true. If travelers are here, they might already be seeding such prophecies in our world, knowingly or not. Maybe our sense of destiny is shaped by travelers who plant ideas that steer us without us realizing it. That's not just a philosophical puzzle, it's a psychological one too. There's also the existential angle. If time travelers are living among us, then we're not just residents of the present, we're participants in a much bigger story. Our daily lives, our struggles, our triumphs, they might all be part of a timeline so vast we can't even imagine it. That can feel either humbling or terrifying. On one hand, it means our choices matter because they ripple across centuries. On the other hand, it means we're never fully in control. because those centuries are rippling back at us too. This brings us to meaning. Humans have always looked for meaning in existence: religion, science, art, philosophy. But if travelers exist, then meaning itself becomes tangled. Are we writing our own story, or are we characters in someone else's experiment? Are we creating culture, or are we preserving what travelers are planting? The idea that our reality might be co-authored by people from the future complicates everything we think about purpose. Yet it might also enrich it, because if time really is a dialogue, then our lives aren't just isolated sparks in history. They're notes in a symphony spanning centuries. Now here's a playful thought experiment. What if time travelers are philosophers themselves? What if the great thinkers, Plato, Confucius, Nietzsche, weren't just extraordinary minds, but travelers sharing wisdom borrowed from future centuries? That would explain why their ideas feel timeless. They might literally be timeless. And if that's the case, then maybe philosophy itself is the record of time travelers leaving breadcrumbs, guiding us toward understanding across generations. Finally, let's flip the lens back to us. If travelers are here, then every encounter with a stranger becomes loaded with possibility. The quiet person on the subway might not just be another commuter, they might be carrying secrets of the 29th century. The eccentric neighbour might not just be odd, they might be trying to acclimate to 21st century customs. And every time we feel like history is accelerating faster than we can keep up, maybe it's because the future is seeping into the present more than we realise. We've wandered through theories, paradoxes, conspiracies, philosophy, and humour, all orbiting around one dizzying question. Could there be people living among us who aren't from our time? And if so, what does that mean for us? At this point, it feels less like science fiction and more like an invitation to think differently about reality itself. Let's ground ourselves by considering why time travel fascinates us so deeply in the first place. It's not just about shiny machines or bending physics. It's about longing. Humans long to undo mistakes, to revisit lost loves, to witness history, to glimpse what's ahead. We're creatures obsessed with time because it defines our lives so completely. We measure birthdays, deadlines, seasons, lifespans. Time feels like a cage and a gift, both precious and suffocating. So the idea that someone has broken free of it, that's intoxicating. And if they're here, blending into our daily lives, they embody the dream we've always had: freedom from the clock. But there's another layer too. Time travelers, if real, would represent a future where we survived. Think about it. If someone made it far enough ahead to invent time travel, then at least one version of humanity didn't destroy itself. That alone is comforting. It means our story continues. So maybe when we imagine travelers walking among us, we're not just indulging fantasy, we're whispering a hope that tomorrow exists and someone has already seen it. And yet the possibility of travelers also asks us to be humble. If people from centuries ahead are observing us, then maybe we're not as advanced as we think. We like to believe we're the cutting edge of history, but maybe we're just the awkward middle school years of civilization, still stumbling through mistakes, while our future descendants take notes. The thought that we're being watched by our own future selves is equal parts embarrassing and inspiring. Embarrassing because who wants their descendants to see their worst moments? Inspiring because it means we're part of something larger than we can grasp. This brings us to one of the strangest ideas of all. Maybe the travelers aren't here to change us. Maybe they're here to learn from us, to see what it felt like to live in the chaos of the 21st century, when technology was exploding, when humanity teetered between destruction and evolution, To them, our world might be like an ancient safari, a place to observe the raw, untamed spirit of humanity before it matured. That puts our lives in a new perspective. The frustrations, the triumphs, even the ordinary moments might be precious to someone from the far future. Of course, the skeptic in us has to step in here. If travelers are real, why don't we see them? Why don't they reveal themselves? Why don't we have undeniable proof? One possibility is that they're bound by rules, cosmic or governmental. Another is that they don't want to change the timeline, so they hide in plain sight. But maybe the deeper truth is that we wouldn't recognize them even if we did. Because if you think about it, what separates a time traveler from an eccentric neighbor, a strange tourist, or a brilliant thinker? Not much. Maybe the proof has always been there, and it only looks ordinary because we don't have the right lens to see it. This idea leads us into an even more unsettling thought. What if the universe itself hides travelers from us? What if reality has built-in safeguards to prevent paradoxes like a cosmic firewall? Every time someone gets too close to discovering a traveler, the memory blurs, the evidence disappears, the story becomes unbelievable. If that's the case, then maybe travelers are everywhere, and we'll never know. Because the universe won't let us know. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the point isn't to prove they exist, but to imagine what it would mean if they did. Because imagination changes how we see ourselves. When we think about travelers among us, we start to live differently. We wonder if our choices matter more than we thought. We question whether history is fixed or flexible. We open our minds to realities beyond the one we've always accepted. That shift in perspective might be the real gift of this question. Travelers don't need to reveal themselves to change us, just the possibility of them changes us already. There's also a playful angle to keep in mind. If travelers are here, they're probably laughing at our theories. They might be sitting in coffee shops, reading books about time travel, shaking their heads at how close or how wildly wrong we are. They might be scrolling through social media, watching us debate them endlessly while they sip lattes and think, if only you knew. And maybe they appreciate our curiosity. After all, curiosity is the first step toward discovery. Perhaps part of their mission is simply to spark it in us. Now let's circle back to us, here and now, as humans living in the present. Whether or not travelers exist, time itself is real and unavoidable for us. We move forward second by second, unable to rewind. That gives every moment weight. It means that, unlike the imagined traveler, we don't get do-overs. But maybe that's the beauty of it. Our time is fleeting, and that makes it meaningful. We don't need a time machine to make history. We're already making it right now. Every choice, every act of kindness, every spark of creativity becomes part of the timeline. Maybe someday, centuries ahead, travelers will look back and say, "This was the moment it all changed," and they'll mean us. As we close this long journey of questions and possibilities, let's land gently. We started with the wonder of time travelers and ended with a reflection on ourselves. Whether or not they walk among us, the truth is that we're all travelers in our own way. We move through time, carried forward by the flow of existence, never able to stop, never able to return. That makes each day both a gift and an adventure. And maybe that's enough. Because if the future is watching, the best thing we can do is live fully in the present. So tonight, as you drift off into sleep, remember that time itself is the strangest traveller of all. It carries us quietly, relentlessly into tomorrow. And who knows, maybe tomorrow you'll pass someone on the street and they'll smile at you in a way that feels just a little out of place, like they know more than they should. Maybe they're just a stranger. Or maybe, just maybe, you've met a traveller out of time.